Hello everyone, my name is Logan Bailey, and I love monsters, classical creatures of gothic horror and tragedy, and none are more of an iconic showcase of these endearing characters than the universal classic dark universe of the 1930s through to the 50s. And today, on the very first episode of The Monster Legacy, we're going to go right back to the extreme genesis of where this enduring franchise came from and the incredible visionary leading man that got us there.
Backstage tour. Take 'em behind the scenes for a revealing and intimate look at the story within the story.
So, naturally, we'd start at the beginning, right? Well...
Oh no, Pumbaa. No. We're going way back to before the beginning.
While the cycle as we know it today traditionally starts with the release of Dracula in 1931, in order to be as thorough as we can, we're going back much further to the spiritual precursor, the genesis of the genre in the silent era, and what will eventually lay the groundwork that inspired Universal to get their monster machine up and going. In this episode, we're going to be talking about The Hunchback of Notre Dame from 1923, spearheaded by the genius, man of 1,000 faces himself, the incredible Lon Chaney. A little background. Born on April Fool's Day, 1883, Chaney's parents, Frank and Emma, were both deaf. So, young Lon grew up often exaggerating his body language with expressive movements in order to convey his emotions to them and master the universal art form that is communication. These formative years subconsciously was all the training he needed to become one of the greatest silent performers. He had performed in vaudeville while he was growing up, and as the invention of film came along, he was determined to become a star. Knowing at the time that anyone and everyone was trying to get noticed to become an actor, Chaney's brilliant mind concocted its own twisted way of standing out: makeup. Chaney quickly became a master unmatched by anyone, seldom seen without his iconic makeup case. He knew that if he could transform his incredibly expressive facial structure into all kinds of unrecognizable and terrifying creations, he'll for sure catch the attention of Hollywood producers, and catch attention he sure did. As his career slowly ballooned, he got comfortable enough in the industry to try and push his own passion projects into production, ones that could really challenge him to explore new skills, whether that be through his makeup or otherwise. The first of these projects was an adaptation of Victor Hugo's famous novel, Notre Dame de Paris. Chaney's persistent passion eventually caught the eye of producer Irving Thalberg, whom desired to make a production that would rise artistically above the otherwise mediocre productions Universal had been making at the time. Chaney had what he described as a burning passion to get the film produced, even managing to obtain the rights himself, and had for years began bartering with the then still relatively new Universal Studios to back the project as a massive and ginormous production. Chaney saw the film as a certified blockbuster, almost 60 whole years before the phrase was even coined. In order to convince Universal's founder Carl Laemmle to approve the production, Thalberg pitched Hunchback to him as a love story. Bolstered by Chaney's recent box office successes, Laemmle agreed. When asked why he wanted to make the film so badly, Chaney, in one of his few conducted interviews, said, "I felt the picture would teach a great lesson. I hope that it had. I wanted to remind people that the lowest forms of humanity, many have within them the capacity for a supreme self-sacrifice. The dwarves, misshaped beggar of the streets, may have the noblest ideals. I've come into actual contact with such people, the underdogs, the very dregs of humanity. Probably most of you haven't, and when you see a deformed and wretched creature, you instinctively shrink from him. Your children are afraid of him. Older boys may mock and taunt him. What do you know of him, really? Why he, like my hunchback, may too be willing to weigh down his life for a friend." Chaney's ownership of the rights to Hunchback gave him far more control of the production than he'd previously had, serving as an uncredited producer on the project, serving to prevent Laemmle from cutting costs on the artistic production. Although it was previously announced by Universal that Chaney regular Todd Browning would be directing, the final film is credited to William Woolsey. although Patsy Ruth Miller, whom played Gypsy Girl Esmeralda in the film, said that any direction she received during production came more from Chaney than Woolsey. The first action in the spare no expense mindset on the film was to recreate the Notre Dame Cathedral and surrounding streets to the exact specifications of the period. Universal's staff set about creating 35 statues, each 10 feet high, with intended likeness of the originals. The construction of the sets was estimated to take 6 months to complete, and managed to fill up that space with an alleged 3,000 extras. Wallace Woolsey Jr., son of the film's director, said that many of the extras during the massive crowd scenes were hired in downtown Los Angeles for $1 a night in meals. Among them, he said, were a good number of prostitutes, who did a considerable sideline business on the sets. Universal also hired 50 detectives and put them amongst the crowd. Their job was to catch pickpockets and various other thieves among the extras. The final film is well done, but isn't paced very well, in my opinion, with lots of good and bad to it. It's mostly a product of its time culturally, and as a film today, it's quite slow, although that would be said of about 80% of silent films to modern audiences, with the first 50 minutes being pretty uneventful, just showcasing the daily lives of our leads, and introducing numerous characters just for the film to have completely forgotten about them by the end of Act 2. It completely picks up, however, around the hour and 10-minute mark with a revitalized amount of energy that carries it to its hour 50-minute conclusion, almost feeling as if it was coming from a completely different film. Whilst maintaining the titular role, Lon Chaney as Quasimodo really isn't in the film as much as people would maybe expect, and it's quite the puzzle that it's named after him. Infamously, author Victor Hugo was furious about this title change in later overseas publications of the novel, and with this adaptation being fairly faithfully adapted from the book, with some characterization and less dark additions taken from Hugo's own rewrite of the story as the stage play Esmeralda, I can understand why. Still, Lon's Hunchback shows a burst of childlike energy and life, full of rapid emotional changes and a physicality and playfulness that, whether he's performing parkour or goofing off scaring the people of France, you always feel endeared to him and want him to be happy. Chaney provides so much personality into the role that you sympathize with him, but you also do laugh at him. You're shocked and appalled at the way he treats the town, yet at the same time, you get it. You never know how to feel about him at any single moment, but you're just drawn to him from minute one, nonetheless. Chaney is completely unrecognizable in the role. You would never look at the images of the iconic Hunchback and see the handsome Chaney, yet none of his performance is lost under it. The look of Quasimodo was one that was required to make the film stand out impressively above all others, yet was a source of tremendous pain for Chaney. In that very same interview, he spoke about the process, saying, "I suffered constant agony while I was portraying that role. My body was strapped into a harness which gave it the appearance of being stunted and deformed. I could only work a few hours a day. It hurt me so. I wore false teeth, which made it almost impossible for me to speak. Over one eye was a heavy lump of putty. When removed after the day's work, my vision was distorted for several minutes. So much strain was thrown upon my other eye that I have worn glasses off-screen ever since making that picture." Chaney self-applied this makeup and rarely complained about it when on the job. For him, it was always a matter of art over ego. He was a true artist in every shape and form, and one deserving of a ton of respect. If anything could be said about Lon Chaney, it's that he was committed to his craft 110%. One may be curious as to how he would have lived amongst modern-day Hollywood, or what even he would have thought of the newer, digital makeup effects given to us through CG. Unfortunately, Hunchback was lost for decades, with the only surviving prints being discovered in the 1970s, as film stock back then was shot on nitrate, which is a highly flammable and delicate substance. And in the early years of Hollywood, film preservation wasn't so much a thing. If you cut a scene and put it in the bin, no copies were made like today for the Blu-ray release, it was just in the bin, deteriorated and lost forever. The prints of Hunchback ultimately discovered in the mid-70s were 16mm duplicate prints, copies of the film, that could be then brought to show at home. Like, instead of buying a VHS, you just bought a canister of film that was copied through a light strip technique. Because of this, the only surviving prints of Hunchback are in pretty bad shape. Due to the film now being in the public domain due to Universal never renewing its copyright, it's been re-released countless times. I watched the 2004 Elstree Studios print on DVD through my film projector in order to truly try and appreciate the film as much as I could, like an audience member may have back then. And you may think that what you're seeing here is a really low quality projection screening, but no, that's just the quality of the prints that have survived, incredibly blurry and in very poor condition. Unfortunately, making it very difficult to truly appreciate Chaney's makeup and take in the stunning atmosphere of the film. Flicker Alley released a restored Blu-ray in 2014, the only time this film has ever been put onto the format, taken from that same 16mm surviving print, but with considerable sharpness and digital noise repair done onto it to showcase the film in the clearest way it could ever possibly still be seen. I'd love to pick up this edition, but unfortunately it's only available in Region 1, was only produced in limited numbers, and is incredibly expensive to pick up now. Maybe one day. Many characters in this film could have been condensed into others, but that's less a fault of the film as it is the original novel, and in later adaptations, including the 1939 version and the 1996 Disney version, they condensed the plot quite a bit to make it more straightforward. In this version, Frollo has a brother, and it's him who's lustful towards Esmeralda, yet Frollo still works with the Hunchback, as well as with many twists and turns with Esmeralda's gypsy heritage, which seems quite tasteless in this day and age, going far beyond whitewashing, instead going into some uncomfortably forced racism of the time just feels out of place, random and unnecessary today. With a heart-wrenching and poetic final scene after a heart-pumping final act, the film expertly balances its action set pieces with the emotional drama our protagonists are feeling. The production design is magnificent, as is the film's impressive use of extras and incredible direction. It's a great time, and it really makes you think a lot. There's a lot to respect about this film and its efforts, feeling like a complete passion project for Chaney. For me personally, the other plots that don't revolve around the Hunchback, like the attack on Phoebus and Frollo's brother's fixation on Esmeralda, it's okay stuff, but it doesn't get close to the dramatic awe the audience has every time the Hunchback is on screen. At times the film does tend to drag, especially in the first act, but the film is almost aware of this and promises to provide a biting climax. That being said, it's a lavish production and clearly a very big deal at the time when it premiered in 1923. Audiences were amazed, intrigued, and horrified in Chaney's Hunchback, solidifying him into A-list status, as the film was an explosive success, proving the very old adage, you truly have to spend money to make it. The Hunchback of Notre Dame gave Carl Laemmle a newfound confidence in Lon Chaney as a creature actor and box office draw, and it made him wonder quite where he could take the actor's career next.